Welcome to today's Opto webinar, where we'll be discussing basic troubleshooting for the SNAP PAC system. We're glad you could join us. My name is Norma Rodriguez, and we also have Ben Orchard, Senior Application Engineer, joining us today.
Thanks very much, Norma. I'm really looking forward to sharing some real-world hints and tips later on in the webinar.
All right, let's get started. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. In product support, that's our team leader's favorite quote when it comes to troubleshooting. Knowing the facts about a problem gets you to the solution a lot sooner, and that's why in product support we like to take a systematic approach when analyzing a situation. You can reach product support by calling us 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time, Monday through Friday, and you'll get a live person when you call. Our receptionist will get your information into our database and give you a unique reference number. Use that reference number anytime you call or email us about the problem. One of our very experienced engineers will then give you a call back. Experienced because of the 8 degreed engineers that might help you, the most junior member of product support has been with us and helping customers for over 10 years. If you're in I want to mention this because it's so important. If you're in a critical situation where you need help sooner rather than later, or even like right now, let the receptionist know. She'll note that in the problem, or if needed, because you're on the job site and your system is down, she'll find someone right now to help you. Our services are completely free, whether you're on the phone, we're on the phone with you for a couple of hours, or we have to go back and forth with email over a few weeks. Email is also a great way to reach product support. Emails have the same priority as if you called in. Let us know in the email if the situation is urgent. State the problem, what products you're using, their versions, a description of your system, and any messages you're seeing. Our team leader monitors the emails throughout the day, and if it's a quick answer, you may get a quick reply. Or if there's some important information you needed, you may get an email requesting some more information. But either way, you're that much closer to solving the problem. There's a list of information you can gather to help get closer to the solution. And you may want to collect it, or you may want to have it ready for product support. Collect it for yourself so you can analyze the problem better. Let's go through these items. I'm going to switch over to PAC control. And from PAC control debug mode, you can inspect a controller. And here, this screen can tell us lots of information, including what firmware version you're running, what strategy, any error message, etc. And one of the things you can do is use Alt, the keystrokes Alt print screen, to capture this screen, then go into Word or Notepad and paste the information there. The list of things that we're going to go through, you can collect the information in a file like that and then send it into product support or just collect it for yourself so that you have the information. I'm going to pull the cable to my EB1 that I've got connected to create some errors. And let's take a look at the message queue. We're going to see errors, error codes, and a description of the errors. And with a short list of errors like we have here, you can take a screen capture and paste it into a Word document like I was mentioning before. Or you can use the Copy All button like we have here. You just press it and it would copy it to the clipboard. Imagine using this if you had 1,000 messages. Then take all those, it would take all those error messages. You could go to an Excel file, paste it in, and then use Excel's powerful filtering and data sorting options so that you can analyze the data much better. Another thing that the error message can tell us, it can tell us where it occurred or what happened. This error message here, it's pretty easy to tell. You can divide by 0. But what if you couldn't tell what was going on, such as this situation here where you just get an overflow error? In this case, what you can do is you go to the user's guide and then look up what that error -13 is. And in my case, what I did is I caused it by setting the month to month 13. And sure enough, that is one of the descriptions for that error. So use that tool for you to be able to see cross-reference information like that. It's important to know what software version you're using with Pack Control and Pack Display. You can bring up those versions under the Help About menu. And in some cases, you may need to send in your strategy or project files to product support. We've built a feature into Pack Control and Pack Display to make it easy to do. Your files are zipped into a file which you can easily attach to an email and then send into product support. Here's a tip if you're using Pack Display. Enable the event log so that there are event messages that come up. They'll be logged to a file, such as in this case here, we're showing messages coming up during a Pack Display project. This way, if problems occur, you'll have a record of events that led up to the problem. Switching over to Pack Manager, use it to inspect I/O or the I/O side of a controller. On a rare occasion, you may not be able to communicate with Pack Control debug mode, but you can with Pack Manager. This actually happened to a customer I was helping out one time. The system was responding as he expected in Pack Manager, but he couldn't connect to it in debug mode. It turned out that there was a bug in the firmware, which we then quickly resolved for him. And last but not least, when collecting information, we'd like to know what network cards you have in your computer and what operating system you're running. I'm going to have my colleague Ben tell you how this bit of information helped solve the problem once.
Thanks, Norma. I had an interesting situation. A customer rang up in pre-sales, and we worked through the bill of materials that he required, and he called back a couple of days later when he had it all delivered, and he just wanted a hand to set the initial IP address. It's called a boot P. Use Pack Manager for that. And then once he had everything set up, he then wanted to be able to get a hand to do the download. So we got the controller boot Ping, and it came time to choose the IP address. And I advised the customer to just go ahead and choose an IP address for the company network and put the controller on the company network. This particular customer didn't want to do that. He wanted to use a crossover cable and go directly from his laptop to the controller because he wasn't quite sure exactly where on the company network the controller was going to go. So we went ahead and we went into the control panel and we set the IP address of the laptop so that it would work, and gave the controller an IP address and got him up and running, and we downloaded our first little strategy, and the customer was very happy, and he finished up and closed business for that night. Came back the next day and my phone rang fairly early in the morning, and it was this customer saying, look, overnight the Opto stopped working. That's a little bit odd. Can you tell me exactly what happened? And he said, nothing. We got it all working last night. I went home, came back this morning, plugged it back in, and I can't communicate with it. I can't download. I can't go into debug. So I thought I'd just take a few moments to help troubleshoot him. And, all the lights were looking good. The link light was on, everything, the cable was all plugged in, the controller had power. And I was actually starting to scratch my head a little bit. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on because he assured me he did nothing. So I got him to open up a DOS prompt because I wanted to be sure that the laptop still had the IP address that we'd set it to last night. So he opened up a DOS prompt, and I got him to type in ipconfig. And the ipconfig gives the information about the internet properties, the configuration. And we saw a little bit of information. It wasn't quite enough, so I got him to do an ipconfig /all. And what that does in Windows is it prints out all of the interface ports on that laptop or the PC. It's going to print it all out in the DOS prompt. And sure enough, once he started reading out the numbers, we found our problem. What had happened is the customer had gone home, turned on his laptop, joined his local home wireless network, done some surfing, checked some email, one thing another, came back the next day, and the laptop then joined the wireless network. And Windows was a little bit confused as to where to route the packets of information. Instead of going to the controller, it was trying to route them out over the wireless interface. So as soon as he turned off his wireless interface on his laptop, bang, everything started working again, and he was able to communicate and debug with the controller. So multiple Ethernet adapters, particularly on laptops, can be a real trap. You've really got to watch out for that one because it's just so easy to turn the wireless on and off. If you have a look at the screen there that Norma's got up, this is her local computer. And you can actually see that Norma's got two Ethernet cards plugged into her computer. You've got Ethernet adapter, and it's got an IP address, 10.192. And then there's local area connector number 2, and it's got a 10.20 address. If Norma ever climbs underneath her desks and actually plugs a cable into that and livens up that interface, she could be in for a little bit of fun because Windows might get a little confused about where to route some packets and where not to route others, just depending on how the applications are set up. So you really want to watch out for that, particularly on laptops, Norma.
Thanks, Ben. You know, what we went through is a list of information that would greatly help you in product support analyze most problems that come up. So now I want to tell you about some resources you have available at your fingertips. We have OptoKB articles available from the Support tab. They're, for the most part, bug reports for software and firmware. Let's take a look. From our home page, you can click Opto Knowledge Base, and we see the screen for OptoKB articles. I recommend leaving the search by article criteria. There are other options you can search by, but typically if you have a unique error or message, you can look up the bug that way. Now let's take a look at a report. There's information here about what products are affected, the versions, symptoms, and the case status. In this case, we fixed the problem, but it's not in a released version. Another great resource that we have is our documentation. We have a great documentation team who keeps our documentation updated, and all our manuals are available on the web, as well as from our products themselves. And you can find a link to the documents from the Support tab on our website. Here's another item I want to mention to you. It's useful. You know, it used to be before the internet. Oh, I can remember years and years ago that I would be asked, can we have a list of all the bugs that are in this release? Well, now I want to mention to you, you know, how easily that's done. Back then it was kind of a monumental task. It's like, how are we going to get that information out? From our Support tab, say you've got a download for software for firmware, for example, for any particular product. Let's just take this first one here for PAC Display. If you scroll down, there's a Related Documents tab, and for the software and firmware, there's always this README file that you can bring up. If you open that up, oh dear, can't see that. Let's see. All right, here we go. If you open that up, what I'm showing you is the README file. If we go to PAC Display, we go to that section, and we can see that in this latest release of 9.0, it lists all the bugs that were included for that product. So just a tip for you in order to see a complete list of bugs in a particular release. I also want to mention you can use the PAC project users guides together. For example, in the reference guide, it will tell you how how to define commands and what what they're for. But if you go to use it along with the user's guide, it will tell you how to use them together. I want to mention, also point out that there's some sample strategies installed in PAC Project. In this particular example, shows you how to use OptoScript commands. This particular example doesn't do anything in particular other than when you open up one of the script blocks, you'll see the syntax for a particular operation or command. And another tip, you can use the online documentation to help build your OptoScript commands. In the OptoScript example, you can copy the OptoScript syntax and then replace the parameter names with those in your strategy. Just a way to try and avoid typing errors. And I quickly want to mention to you the I/O enabler example. If you can add this to your strategy, your I/O units can then automatically be re-enabled. And check the website for more sample strategies under Downloads, Samples, and Freeware. For those of you with older applications, we have some great documents you can use to migrate to the SNAP system. We also have an assortment of how-to videos on various topics under the Learn tab. And really, I'd like to stress this or point this out to you. Let me recommend that you subscribe to the My Opto 22. It's found on the home page, and this way you'll be notified of any updates to only the products you want to know about. You can find out about bug fixes, new revisions, or updated manuals via an email. And this last part of the webinar covers some final real-world tips my colleague Ben is so gladly willing to share with you so that this doesn't happen to you too. But before he gets into his experiences, or recommendations I should say, let me mention one more thing that goes along with real-world tips, and that's check the voltage at the snap rack. Measure from the minus terminal to the far end of the diode. Make sure there's 5.1 volts, but not more than 5.2. And just the other day, a customer called in saying the brain was working fine, but their analog modules on the far end of the rack were showing a value of negative 32,768, which actually means there's no reading. So these were classic symptoms of low voltage on the rack, and it actually turned out he had 4.8 volts coming in on the rack. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Ben, and go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Norma. Just on that voltage measuring on the rack, we've actually just 2 or 3 days ago here at Opto, we finished up doing a little movie on how to take that measurement, and it only takes about 1.5 minutes to watch, and certainly makes it very easy and very straightforward for you to be able to visualize and see exactly what's going on. So that's on our website under the watch section. You might want to have a look at that one at some stage. Okay, well, unfortunately, I've got quite a bit of experience of doing things not quite cleanly with Opto. It's a bit of a slow learner, so what I want to do is just try and speed everyone up and hopefully avoid some of the mistakes that I've made. This first one is a classic, no instructions in the PAC control block. This can be a real trap when you're building your charts for the first time. If you have a look at this chart here, it actually looks like it's completely finished. And that's a bit of a danger, because if you make your charts look like they're completely finished when they're not, you might inadvertently download them and actually try and run them and then wonder why they're not working. Yes, I did that, probably on more than one occasion. So I've just got 2 little tips. Here's 2 ways that I've sort of came about it. When you're constructing your chart, you can paste all the blocks down if you like, and then only put the name in of the block once you put the instructions in there. Then once the instructions are in there, then you put the name on the block. That way when you come along later and you have a look at your chart, you can see exactly where you're up to, because perhaps this condition block here will still be called, you know, block 5 or something like that, and you'll know, that's where I'm up to. That block doesn't have any instructions in it. Another technique that my buddy Nick used, what he would do is he would lay out all his blocks, and he would name all of his blocks so that he knew exactly what each block was going to do, and then he would fill out the instructions in each block, and then only once the instructions were filled out in that block, then he would connect it. And then once the instructions were filled out in this second block, then he would connect it. And this way, he was able to tell whenever he looked at any of his charts in construction, he could tell exactly where he was up to, but by looking at the block names, he could get a feel of what the chart was supposed to do. So that's just 2 tips. And the other big thing that you really want to watch out for, condition blocks will exit true if they don't have anything in them. So you really want to make sure that your condition blocks do have the correct instructions in them, because when you're single stepping and you're debugging, if it exits true all the time and you think, hang on a minute, that shouldn't be exit true, that should be false, you double click on it, open it up, and find out that it's empty. Not a big deal, it just means that you're going to have to do another little download after you put the instruction in there, but it could save you some pain. The next one, unfortunately, is a bit of a sad story. I had a customer ring up who was very upset with Opto because he had a digital output point that was just turning on and off seemingly at random, and he couldn't control it and he didn't know what was going on. Thankfully, he was able to let me log on to his desktop from here at Opto, and I was able to view his strategy. And it was a pretty messy strategy. There was a lot of connections going everywhere, and I thought this is going to be pretty tricky. But there's a good tool in pack control called the find tool. And so I simply said to him, I said, look, so what we're going to do is we're just going to do a find on the point so that I can find everywhere that it's referenced in your strategy so that we can start trying to find out why it's flashing on and off. So I was in debug mode and I could inspect the I/O point. Sure enough, it was flashing on and off. I clicked on find and I got the name of the I/O point, typed it into the find, clicked on find, and it was listed in 4 locations. There was a turn on and a turn off in one chart, and there was a turn on, turn off in another chart. So I did a split screen and put the 2 charts side by side, put them both in single step, highlighted the blocks where those instructions were, and both charts were running, and sure enough, the way he'd laid out his logic was that one chart was turning it on and the other chart was turning it off. And because of the different execution time of the 2 charts, it looked as if this output was just flashing on and off randomly, where in actual fact it was doing exactly what he programmed it to do. And that is, one chart was going to turn it on and one chart was going to turn it off. So you just want to be a little bit careful where you're accessing the same variable or the same I/O point from multiple charts. Here's another good one that I've fallen victim to more than once, particularly on complex charts. Just simply leaving out a connection line. They're so small, they're so fine, it can be fairly easy to leave them out, and you can see here that I've just completely left out the connection. And so what's going to happen is this chart is going to execute just those first couple of blocks and then stop. It's not going to go any further. We're not going to get the wait 15 minutes down the bottom here, and it's never going to loop back around. So all because of that tiny little connection line. You want to make sure that you remember to put them in at all times. And again, you can, in pack control, you can do a find missing connections, and it'll go through and it'll show you everywhere that there is no connection. That can be very, very helpful, particularly for looping charts, because you shouldn't have any missing connections anywhere. This next real world tip, unfortunately, a little bit funny again at my expense. Pardon me. Back in the early days, Opto, there was no way of sending an email from the brain in the early Ethernet devices, and so one of the people here at product support came up with a chart that would enable us to send emails via an email server right from the controller by running this chart. Well, the chart would run and send an email only in single step. As soon as we took the chart out of single step mode, I never once got an email. It was very, very frustrating. I just couldn't work it out, and got onto product support and talked with them a little bit, and they agreed it was a little bit odd that it would work in single step but not in auto run. So what they got me to do is a thing called a sniff, a Wireshark sniff, and we looked at the communications between my controller and the Microsoft Exchange email exchange server, and I sent that sniff log back to Opto. They analysed it, and what was happening when the chart was not in single step mode, pardon me, The Microsoft Exchange server couldn't respond quick enough. The controller in auto run mode was just too fast for the Exchange server, and it was tripping over itself and not sending the email. So what I did was had to put in some appropriate delays in the communications so that it slowed things down. And there's the real hint. In single-step mode, your chart executes at the speed that you see the red block stepping through the different function blocks. And so that's exactly what was happening. It would slowly step through the function blocks, and the communications with the Exchange server would be just fine. As soon as I put it in auto run, it would go to high speed or the usual speed, and it was too fast. So you'll really get this issue when you're doing communications, either serial or Ethernet. That's when you really want to watch out that you've got some padded delays and some intelligent loops so that it doesn't hang up and it doesn't take too long than it needs to. So you really want to watch out for that. My second piece of advice after I got it working in auto run mode is always, always, always make sure that you set a flag or you have some sort of check and condition that you only ever send one email. I foolishly, in my early days, had a very simple check. If the digital pointer's on, send an email. And while ever that digital point was on, it would keep sending emails. I ended up sending about 15,000 emails in very short order. And for better or for worse, I actually crashed the Microsoft Exchange server. And I wasn't too popular with the IT department. And you would think after that that I would learn my lesson, but sadly no. But a few weeks later, I did the exact same thing, but this time, instead of sending, well, I was sending an email. The email was actually going through to our cell phone company, and they were actually sending text messages to our cell phone, the engineer on call cell phone at the hospital where I worked. And I sent about 5,000 emails before I figured out what was going on and very quickly shut it down. It didn't crash the Exchange server, but it did send 5,000 text messages at 25 cents each to the cell phone. So my boss was not happy with the expense, and I was not happy having to sit there all night clearing out all these text messages out of the cell phone. So yeah, note to self, whenever you're sending emails or anything that's going externally to alarms or things like that, make sure you have a checkbox so that you only ever send one. PAC display connected to the wrong tag. This can happen very easily, very inadvertently. You know, particularly if you're working with table indexes, you know, it's only too easy to accidentally connect to index 5 instead of index 6. And PAC display is going to work just fine. It's going to trend. It's going to display the data. There's going to be no problem. But you know, it's not until you look closely and go, well, hang on a minute, why is that temperature wrong? And a bit of a tip that I've got there is always be very careful with PAC display, because PAC display is what your users, management and other workers interface with the process. And they have to believe what is in PAC display as being absolute truth. And so a simple connection error, a slight slip of the mouse or wrong click, you can really send your co-workers off on a bit of a wild goose chase while they're looking for things that aren't true, because they believe PAC display is absolutely spot on. Incorrect module wiring. This is one that time after time, particularly when we were commissioning a new building or a new installation, would be quite a handful. After a time, my boss said, no, look, I don't want you wiring modules anymore. I don't want you building panels anymore. We can get electricians to do that. Your time is too valuable programming. So he took that function away from me. And so what I would do is I would hand over the module, and on the side of all of the SNAP modules is a little sample wiring diagram, so the electrician could look at that. I'd point that out. But I'd also print out the appropriate page from the manual showing how to connect the wiring, and I'd give that to him as well. And, you know, not all that often, but often enough that it became quite irritating. The electrician would just not pay attention, and he would just wire the module any which way. So then you'd come time to commission, you know, you'd go into debug mode and you'd be trying to look at some temperatures or something, and they'd just be all over the place, and you'd be doubting yourself whether you've got the module scaled correctly and all that sort of thing, and it would turn out to be just a module wiring error. It's important to note that the Opto modules are tested twice. Every single module is tested twice when they leave the factory. So the chances of you getting a dead out-of-the-box module is very, very rare. So it's either wiring or your configuration in the programming. It's one or the other. That's generally what I found. It's never Opto giving you a faulty module. This next one, a blown fuse in the field. Norma's actually got one of our graphic artist guys here to draw this up because it's pretty important, and it's just a bit clearer when I talk through the situation. All of our switch gear at the hospital had a 3-position switch on the mechanical boards, and they were marked on, off, and auto. Pretty self-explanatory. When it was switched to on, power would be switched through to that contactor or that pump, and it would run all the time. Off was open circuit, and so the device would turn off. And when it was switched down to auto, it would be switched through the digital output module of the Opto 22 rack. Well, one day, more than once unfortunately, but one time electrician would get a fault ticket to say this pump is not running on auto. He would walk down to the mechanical board, it would be sitting on auto, the pump would not be running. He flicked it through off to on and found that the device would run when it was on. He'd flick it back to auto, it wouldn't run, and he'd say, oh, the Opto's blown, and that'd be it. But unfortunately he got me involved, and we started to have a look at it. Where he sort of went wrong is he did have a look inside the cabinet, and he saw that the LED on the top of the module was turned on. And so he thought, well, if the LED is turned on, the power should be flowing, and when it's on auto, if the LED is on and the pump is not on, then the Opto's blown up. But where he went slightly wrong, and it's a subtle point that I want to make, that LED is really the software indication. On a digital output module, the LED is telling you what the software, what your program wants the output point to do. So if the LED is on, that's because the software is telling it to be on, not because there's actually electricity flowing. And so some of you have probably already jumped ahead of me. You can see when he switched it to on, the power came through the fuse, through the on position, and into the device, through the device, and down to neutral, and everything was working. But when he flicked it to auto, the power came down here, stopped at this blown fuse, and that was the end of that. Just because the LED was on doesn't mean power was actually flowing through the module. So as soon as we replaced this fuse here, lo and behold, the pump started to work in the auto position, and I left it to the electrician to find out why that fuse might have blown. So you do want to be a little bit careful that just because the LED is on, the software is trying to make it run, but it doesn't mean there's actually power flowing through the module. So there's some real-world hints and tips. I'll turn it back to Norma for the rest of the webinar. Just got to untangle the mouse here.
And now, last but not least, should one of our products need to be repaired, call product support so we can verify there's a problem. We'll give you an RMA number so you can send it in and have it repaired. And we usually have about a 5 to 10-day turnaround. Our products have a 30-month warranty from the date of manufacture, except for solid-state relays and modules. They have a lifetime warranty if they were made after January of '96. And we'll cover the cost of repair when it's under warranty, but when they're out of warranty, it'll be half of list price to repair. So with that, I just want to remind you we're here to help you in product support, and our services are completely free. So now I want to look at the questions and see what we have from, okay, John has given us this tip. Good to check for ripple AC voltage just to be sure power supply filter is okay. That's a good tip. John, I think there's a document 1271 available from our website. If you enter it in the search field, it'll come right up, and it talks about using power supplies, external power supplies, and different things to check with respect to power. Thanks for that tip, John. Any other questions? Well, then I thank you for participating, and until the next webinar, we'll see you soon.